All right, and this meeting is being recorded. So I'd like to call to order the Concord Preservation Committee public meeting of October 20th, 2020. My name is Tom Kearns, Chair, and I'd like to take this opportunity to ask our committee members to introduce themselves, and I'll do this as a quick roll call, and we'll use that for any voting, although I think we don't have any particular voting this evening, but Tom is here. Peter, if you could introduce yourself and your appointment.
Peter Ward, Vice Chair, Select Board nominee.
Thank you. Judy.
Judy Zombrecker, Natural Resources Commission Representative.
Thank you, Paul.
Paul Grasso, Recreation Commission.
Has Burton arrived? No Burton, will pass there. Nancy.
Nancy Nelson with the Historical Commission.
Thank you. Hester with us? No. And Diane?
Here, Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee.
Thank you, Diane. And John?
Yeah, John Kratzley, Select Board appointee.
All right, it appears we do have a quorum. And we have, once again, a very exciting agenda assembled by Heather for this evening. We will focus on the presentations of 5 applications by at least 2 applicants representing various town projects. And the purpose tonight is to have a presentation to make sure that the committee has a clear understanding of the goals of the proposals. I would suggest that the presentations are, approximately 10 minutes or so, or maybe less, but relatively succinct. It'll give us another 10 minutes or so for questions and discussions by committee members, and maybe, and then a couple of additional minutes for any questions by members of the public or our liaisons. I see Matt Johnson with us, our Select Board liaison. Thanks for being here, Matt. And I don't know if Christine is with us on the Finance Committee, but she will sometimes join us as well. But we'll reserve a little bit of time for each of those. And then in 30 minutes or less, maybe 25 or a little bit less, we'll be able to flip to our next application and presentation.
Hester joined us.
Hi, Hester. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry,
Hey,
I was trying to get into last week's meeting and it wasn't working.
Well, we're happy.
But now here I am.
We're very happy to have you this week. You want to just introduce yourself and your appointment?
Hi, Hester Schnipper, representative from the Concord Housing Authority Board.
Yeah, okay, very good, excellent. And so with regard to our agenda, we have 5 applications, and we are going to start with the White Pond Beach improvements. And before we launch the presentation, Heather, did I miss any details? Good shape and good. Everybody ready? Looks like it. And is it, Kate, are you going to lead us off? You want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. I am having issues with my computer, so I'm on my iPad, and I'm hoping this is going to work because the screen is totally black. So. Well,
Kate, I can hear you loud and clear and see you. So everybody else okay? So far, so good with your iPad.
Yep, I can see it.
Yes.
And then I think maybe it would be best if we were muted for Kate's presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if everyone wants to mute themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Kate Hodges. I'm the Deputy Town Manager, and I'll be presenting the White Pond Beach improvements and our application this evening. So thank you for giving us the chance to speak with you all. Let me see, with me tonight are Ryan Kane, our Recreation Director, and Ryan Orr, our Facilities Director, and John Stragus, our Facilities Operations Manager. And we collectively are kind of spearheading this campaign. I had sent a presentation to Heather, so I'm wondering if Heather, you could put that up on the screen for me. Of course, I won't be able to see it, but that'll just be even better. Oh my.
Can everyone see that?
Looks
Okay.
good, Heather.
Yes.
Yep.
Kate, we're on the title slide.
Okay, next one, please.
Okay, the problems.
Yeah. So as you know, White Pond has been the subject of discussion and previous CPC applications for the past 3 budget cycles. The gift of the pond parcels was finalized in 2019, and the town has been working on multiple portions of the beginning part of site development since 2018, including a comprehensive site survey, a stormwater management analysis, code and ADA compliance audits, master planning, and a full audit of all of the trees and endangered and or invasive species on the property. And so throughout the past 2 years, it's become abundantly clear that access, including ADA code compliance, as well as stormwater management, really are the greatest needs in terms of improvement or expansion for the beach and the recreational parcel. Next slide with the universal design. Great. So with that in mind, the town team began the process of looking into a plan for the property consistent with what's called the universal design approach. Using things that are universally designed ensure access, of course, but also ensure the ease of use and design standards which benefit all types of users. The original concept of universal design was created by architect and an industrial engineer, Ronald Mace. Mr. Mace was also a wheelchair user. And in 1997, these seven principles of universal design were developed, and they are widely used, particularly in park, open space, and recreational facilities. One of the most common examples for universal design, just as a matter of example, is a curb cut. So a curb cut is obviously essential for people who are using wheelchairs, but it's also a benefit to kids riding bikes, seniors using walkers, parents pushing strollers, and even delivery people who have to pull heavy dollies. When something is universally designed, the idea is it can be used by all. But principle 1 deals with equitable use, meaning the design is useful and marketable to people with all types of diverse abilities. 2 is the flexibility in use, meaning that it accommodates a wide range of preferences and abilities. And 3 is that it's simple and intuitive. So it's easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, their knowledge, ability to read, language skills, or even really having to put in a lot of concentration. Principle 4 is that there's perceptible information so that it communicates the necessary information to the user, regardless of whether it's light or dark, stormy, clear, or any other adverse weather conditions. 5 is the tolerance of error, which means that it minimizes the hazard or adverse consequences, either accidental or on purpose. 6 is that the design has a low physical effort, so it can be used efficiently with a minimum amount of fatigue. And principle 7 is the size and space approach, meaning that it is the appropriate size and space is provided for both approach, reaching, manipulation, and use, regardless of body size, posture, mobility, body type, etc. So those are the principles that we looked at when looking at essentially how to traverse from the top of the hill down into the beach area, and then how we can improve the side of the ADA and restroom facility access along the driveway. Next slide, please. So regarding universal design's access from the parking lot to the beach, we are proposing a central code compliant granite or concrete set of steps. The railing would be installed as required by code, and this would provide the quickest way for an individual or individuals to park at the parking lot and directly access the beach area. We'd also propose a new ADA fully accessible pathway that is designed consistent with the 7 aforementioned principles. The pathway we propose will be made of bituminous pedestrian concrete, and in areas where the grade or slope is greater than the 5% maximum required by ADA, railings and sidebars would be installed accordingly. Among the proposed pathway, we propose also to reposition the existing stones and boulders that are in and amongst the property, including many that are buried, as a means to prevent off-path activity and to create several natural slope reinforcement aids, which will assist in erosion control. Next slide, please. In addition to the modifications along or within the hillside that I just talked about, we also propose modifications to the lower roadway area adjacent to the boat launch, including wooden decking leading to and from a dedicated parking spot and a drop-off area, and to and from the existing seasonal restroom facility, which is the restroom trailer. We also propose a fully compliant ADA mat, which would be installed in the last section of the ramp over the sand to provide direct water access to those wheeled mobility aids. We propose this to ensure that no permanent impervious surfaces would be erected within the 25-foot wetland buffer area. This low impact and fully removable system will allow compliance with the ADA while also ensuring sustainability and protection of and within the major resource area. The estimated cost for the walkways and ADA improvements overall is equal to around $1 million. We're asking for about $173,000 from CPC to assist in these efforts, which is about 40% of that part. Next, please. As alluded to before, part 2 is the stormwater management, and it is an equally important factor and objective related to the proposed improvements. When designed properly, a comprehensive stormwater management plan and system can reduce runoff and improve water quality in and around the pond and resource area. This has become a real hot button issue both for the community and abutters, as we see a decrease in the pond quality over the past 10 years. Our initial proposed design calls for one large stormwater infiltration basin constructed near the parking area up top. But we're also proposing 2 subsurface stormwater infiltration chambers, one located at the bottom of the boat ramp drive with an underground connection into the existing chamber, which is currently undersized and often clogs, which is below the sandy beach. Next slide, please. As you can see, these 2 circled areas here show where the subsurface chambers would be generally located, and the illustrations to the right are basically to showcase how these types of systems and operations work. Next, please. A large stormwater infiltration basin, as said before, will be constructed at the top of the property near the parking area. This type of open air basin is considered a type of green infrastructure, which encompasses new approaches and new technologies which work to infiltrate, evaporate, capture, and reuse the stormwater and retain natural landscapes. We plan to have several smaller scattered natural bioretention areas, which are often referred to as rain gardens, which capture water by reducing the flow rates and helping with total water quality and pollutant runoff from the impervious surfaces, such as our proposed ADA walkway along the hillside. It will also deter people from going off of the access areas into other parts of the reforestation efforts. The estimated cost for the majority of these stormwater management efforts described is equal to anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000. This application is seeking $127,000 from CPC to cover some of the stormwater management efforts, keeping that amount at under 30%. Next slide, please. The schedule here shows a timeline thus far and in the future pending the availability of funds. The bottom line is that should funding efforts be successful, the initial construction could commence in the spring of 2021, providing all the necessary permits are received and the community has decided on a design. Again, we're requesting $300,000 from CPC for fiscal year 22, $173,000 for access, $127,000 for stormwater efforts. Next slide, please. This is just another visual timeline highlighting the funding milestones. As of now, we anticipate requesting between $500,000 and $600,000 in the fiscal year 22 capital budget, which will be voted on at the June 2021 annual town meeting. Next slide. So the overall project cost for stormwater and access improvements is estimated at about $1.47 million. This amount includes a project contingency of 10% and a price escalator of 3%, accounting for the dollars that we have outlined here are 2020 rates. The tables at the top represent the funding needed by area or focus. Area 1 refers to the driveway and the lower waterfront and restroom portion, and Area 2 consists of the hillside areas and the parking lot. The table at the bottom represents the town's funding strategy to date, combining fiscal year 20 CPC allocation of $250,000 with this year's capital amount of $600,000. We have $850,000 available to begin the work. Next fiscal year, in addition to the $300,000 sought here, we'll also be requesting, as I said, $500,000 to $600,000 in capital. Should all these efforts be successful, we will have 1.6 to 1.75 million available, which is more than enough to do the project. The team would also like to note that any monies that are not spent of the CPC allocations would be returned to the CPC once the project is complete. Next slide. Finally, this is the entire artistic discussion image with the areas of focus that I just spoke about specifically highlighted. This is not drawn to scale, this is not a construction drawing, and it is subject to change and most likely will be. The one thing that I wanted to note is that while we are looking to do most of the work within the green areas that I've highlighted here, it may become necessary to widen part of the roadway. But with the outline of funding that we have said and outlined in a couple of slides before, we would have more than enough to be able to do that. So the team is here and I'm here to answer any questions, and certainly we can ask Ms. Gill if she can go back to any particular slide that someone wants to see.
Hey, thank you for that presentation. So the CPC members have volunteered to become liaisons for various applications. And so I would suggest that maybe we start with liaisons and then move to the rest of the group for a lightning round of questions and discussion. And for the White Pond Beach improvements, the project liaisons are Peter and myself. Peter, questions for Kate and the team?
Sure. Kate, thanks very much for the presentation. Given that the roadway down to the boat ramp is owned by the state, do you anticipate any challenges as you try to implement the stormwater management plan? I mean, it seems to be a real source of water flowing down that hill and into the pond.
Sure, absolutely. Heather, would you mind going back to the second to last slide, so not the thanks slide, but the one before that that shows the entire property? So exactly where the green line is, that if you were driving the car that's pictured there and you're looking out of the driver's side window, pretty much where that line is, if you were to zoom in on this picture, you can see that there's sort of a row of what looks to be rocks that are there. We plan on actually making a swale down that way with a couple of catch basins in there and some rain gardens in order to capture most of the stormwater that's coming down and hitting off there. That is actually, that's why we had the survey done. That actually, although there is some roadway there, belongs to the parcel that we now own. Additionally, just as a belt and suspenders type of thing, we entered into an access, use, and maintenance agreement with the state, meaning that they retain all of the rights of ownership, meaning they can use it and it remains, excuse me, access year-round for fishermen and boats because of it being a great pond. But we have the ability to improve upon it and use it as long as the use is consistent with the adjacent property. You can unshare if you want now, Heather. Did that help answer the question?
Yes, it does. So it sounds like there's an accommodation whereby we the town can make improvements in support of the proper drainage of the water, the rainwater there, and that's consistent with the agreement that's in place with the state.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Thanks, thanks, Peter. I'm just going to make a comment as one of the liaisons, and this set of initiatives has been before this committee in the past, and I just found the application really clear and succinct, and focused on accessibility and sustainability, which are two primary evaluation criteria of the CPC. So I thought that was really great, and I went through the numbers. I think I understand those, as well as a potential spring 21 start. So a lot of that kind of major criteria seem to be in place in your application. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Other questions or comments from committee members? Diane. And remember the unmute.
I understood that the 25-foot buffer zone, I understood you to say that. I thought the NRC was talking about a 50-foot buffer zone from water and places. How does that vary when in this kind of a public use situation? Maybe Judy can address this. Thank you.
Yeah. And Delia's on too, so she can correct me if I get it incorrect. With regards to the buffer zone, this is with regards to wetlands. We have a 25 no disturb zone that we seek to maintain, and then a 50-foot no build zone. However, we do provide for waivers, and the applicant has the opportunity to present to the NRC work to be done in the 50-foot or in the 25-foot, and fill in the waiver, and then we discuss that, make sure we understand it, and then we value the weight of that versus the disturbance to the wetlands area, and provide the permit. So it's not like it's absolutely no work done. It's just something that we very carefully review and really want to discourage, but sometimes it is appropriate to have that work done.
Kate, have you approached the NRC for such a waiver?
So we are going to be going through all of the public comment parts first and come up with a finalized design, and then submit our notice of intent to the NRC, and fully expect to be requesting for a waiver within the 50-foot. It's going to be necessary both for some of the rain gardens and infiltration basins, but also for the part of the ramp that really can't be accomplished with the rollout because it's too steep. But we are committed, and I'm certain things could change, but we are committed to not having anything in the 25-foot no build. And so we've been trying like heck to think of ways that we can ensure that. And so our latest plan is the roll-up removable carpet that would be able to be a transition. So as long as when we present that to the community and get some feedback from the Disability Commission, if they feel like that is responsive to their needs, then that would be what we would be proposing.
Thank you so much. I have one other question. On the map, on the far left, we have it in red on the original proposal. I think you have it in yellow or green on the one you just presented. That's a roadway, right? That goes right down to the beach.
I'm sorry.
Is it a roadway that goes right down to the beach?
The drive?
This part, that's not going to help you, is it? This part, can't you tell what I'm talking about? If we look at this map on the left-hand side, there's a gray long line inside the orange yellow. I mean the green yellow lines. That is a roadway, right?
Yes, that is the existing roadway that leads down to the beach, and then it's the state boat launch area and those parking spots that are there.
Okay, and that is really to facilitate boat launches and bringing boats down closer to the area, right?
Correct, and that actually was one of the conditions of our use and maintenance permit, is that those have to stay available and open for anyone loading or unloading a canoe or kayak or someone fishing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Other members of the committee? Judy.
Since the state owns the access, I just want to double check, is there any opportunity to get funding from them to help with the stormwater management?
So this question has been asked multiple times, and we have certainly requested that over and over. As a matter of fact, I believe the town was heavily pushing for that back when the property was still owned and maintained by the White Pond Associates. And the state's position is that they will allow us to maintain it. They will allow us to use it and regulate it at no cost to them and all cost to us. And they were relatively unwavering on their stance for that. So
Thank
not
you, Kate.
without our efforts, I will assure you of that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other committee member questions? Nancy? Remember your mute.
I'm sorry. Kate, I'm coming back to a question I asked before about the zigzaggy path, the ADA path. So your memo of September 21st said that you guys were going to roll out several universal design concepts. Was that related to the path? Then maybe there's some options there for what's always been shown.
Yes, so we use the universal design concepts actually for the entire parcel, and
Right.
part of it, we wanted it to be open and accessible for persons, even if they didn't have mobility issues,
Right.
even if it was something like a baby stroller or a toddler just learning to walk, or someone with a wagon. But what we have to do, and again, this is an artistic rendition, so this where it's placed out on here might not be exact, but we have to maintain the slope of under 5%, of course.
Right.
And so what that does is make the walkway fairly long and meandering. We also were looking initially that we were going to have some kind of infiltration basin or something to catch stormwater basically in the middle of the hillside, and it would be relatively, well, it was going to be relatively ugly with a sort of retention wall. And so what we've done is we're trying to put the stormwater along the side so it sort of looks much more natural with a lot of reforestation and native plants. And so the one thing that we did was we determined that if somebody just wants to get out of their car and go directly down to the beach, we want to give them a direct route to do that. And so that's where the idea of the staircase down the middle came from.
Right.
And that's sort of one of those universal design concepts that it basically has the easiest and fastest way to get there, or there's the other one. So this by no means is the final iteration, but this amount of pathway is going to be necessary for us to be able to build it to code, which would be a requirement. I have asked Ryan Orr and his crew, and they've graciously agreed to blow off the area and kind of mark it out a bit. And I was hoping to ask, and I have asked the Disability Commission to hold an on-site meeting so they could take a look at it. My fear is we build it and someone says, well, that's much too far to go, or it's much too exhaustive, etc.
Right.
I will be certainly getting feedback, not only just from the disability community, but from the community at large about that.
That was my next question, that this, I wondered if this path, because of its length, is going, in spite of the grade, is going to be arduous for people with disabilities, all kinds, and maybe even other people.
No, I agree. When we plan on asking the questions.
And I thought a people mover might be feasible, but maybe it's not. I meant that sort of seriously, but maybe it's not. And then phasing, what is there am I missing a phasing of the project?
Well,
what gets done when and how and that?
Yeah, so what we are looking for in a perfect world, we would receive the funding that we're asking for this fiscal year from both CPC and the amount from capital. And we would start with most of the asphalt, earthwork, and removal of invasives and stormwater initially. Once that gets done, town meeting will have happened. July 1st will have happened. We would have access to those other funds, and we would continue on. And so while that's a phase 1 and 2, it's more cost effective to bid those together because they carry with them mobilization, as you well where, and all of the things that we have to do to prep the site, including making sure that we have things around the tree protection and some of the earthwork. And so we're trying to bundle those together so that we have one price for prepping the entire site, even if work is only going to be done in one area.
And
Thank
that
you,
was,
Kate.
that chart was included in what you sent today, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. So the one thing to say is that a future phase, which may or may not be necessary depending on use and anything else, is the turn when you're coming off of Plainfield Road and you drive down into the driveway, and you basically have to hook a pretty tight left into that area, and it's one way. Realistically, we should probably widen that so that if two people are coming, that, you know, they're not basically one having to wait, and there's pretty a pretty heavy, I don't know, like down that your car would kind of bottom out. That isn't included in here. We haven't seen that to be too much of an issue. Most of the people who are using the property know these things already, and they're not coming barreling in. But that could be a later phase should we see that there's, you know, accidents or anything else that's happening there. But we haven't seen that.
Okay.
Thank you, Kate. Looks like maybe a last question by Diane. Or John, and then John. Diane, wanna?
I'm sorry. The stairway seems to me huge, much bigger than I think it seems to me would be necessary. I've just been to lots of state and national parks this summer, and they've been more natural in their presentation. It's been more like the windy road that you're constructing or imagining, Kate. Why do we need the stairwell? I mean, stairway. Why don't we just use the windy route? People with great mobility can use it. They can enjoy what they see on the way up and down. I found the stairs, just personally, I found them just gargantuan in comparison to what might really be needed.
So great point. We're not married to the idea one way or the other. I guess our thinking was in looking at how people accessed the site the past 2 years. We have seen a natural pathway that has developed from people basically getting a running start and running and dragging whatever they have down, not through the stairway. And quite frankly, I think that if you get a very excited, you know, child who can't wait to get down, if they have to meander through the pathway, and we're making it somewhat difficult with the stormwater management and the rain gardens, they're probably just going to run right through them on their way. And so we thought perhaps if we give somebody an easy and quick access, we might deter people from going off of the identified walkways. But I think when we kind of flush this out with the general public and at the public hearing that's happening next week, that's a great question to ask and pose to the community. And we're certainly happy to see, you know, if we do the pathway and people don't want the stairs, and then we have to, my only concern is that what we think will happen does happen, and then we have to come back and install the stairs, and that in and of itself is going to be quite difficult unless we need to disrupt all the earth again around it.
Thank you, Kate. John. John, unmute.
Kate, is anything planned for the bathrooms? Or are you going to just keep what you have as you move forward?
Sure. Yeah. Heather, do you mind going back to? I'm gonna have to figure. Let's try slide number 3. I know if that's it, if I can remember. No, that is not it. 5, perhaps. Yes. So on this, you see that white rectangular box at the top left-hand corner. That is the restroom trailer. It's existing. Ryan Kane and his team have purchased and maintained that. And that will be staying as the restroom facility. If you were down there, you know that it has a lift that comes down for ADA accessibility, and you'd press the button to get the lift up. And sometimes that can be a little tricky, particularly with sand. And so what we propose is this wood deck that basically has a ramp that has a small, pavilion area, although we're not having any overhead pavilion, it'd just be the deck that then comes down and you'll be able to essentially access the trailer. The nice thing about that is that there's nothing going into the earth. We're not putting any water lines down there. We're not putting any sewer, any septic, and that seasonal restroom can be taken away in the wintertime if we need to and stored. And we're thinking that might deter people from coming down when the beach is closed, maybe or maybe not. So the restroom remains, but what's around it and its access is improved.
Thanks. And the 250,000 that was just voted, what is that going to be spent on?
I'm sorry, just loaded. You mean fiscal year 20's CPC appropriation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that is for part of the access and ADA modifications. So the total amount for access and ADA modifications is around $500,000. We're using the initial 250, which was the request that we made back in fiscal year 20 for that, and then asking for an additional 173 from this application. And then the rest we're going to supplement from capital.
Thank you.
Judy?
Yeah, I just had one other question on the budget, Kate. If I recall in your presentation, you mentioned the total budget was 1.42 million. Is that correct?
1.47.
1.47. Okay, because I'm looking at the sheet that you provided us, which is very helpful. And maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but I see it's 1.496.
So that includes site amenities, miscellaneous site amenities that would not be paid for from either CPC or the general fund. And it really, I wanted to capture that because that would be part of the operational expense that recreation incurs, but still is part of the overall project. But that's consistent with what we were talking about when we accepted the gift at that special town meeting, that the town would be responsible for capital, but recreation would be responsible for site amenities and upkeep, which is why we charge membership.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Did we get through it? No more committee member questions? Members of the public, any questions for Kate and her team? Seeing and hearing none. Kate, I have one.
I don't know if a liaison counts as the public, but.
Yes, absolutely. Matt, please.
I just was curious, like if this scope is completed, these two elements over time, is that the full scope of the project? Are we all done? Is that everything that's ever going to happen? I mean, in the current planning horizon, or is that still like, is the restroom facility still a temporary item and we'll need to come back in a couple of years and fund that?
Sure. So it really is dependent on what the community wants. From the team standpoint, this vastly improves both accessibility and stormwater management. And while the question or how you phrase it is this it forever? Certainly not, but I think that there's a lot of other capital projects that are happening in town, that aren't associated with White Pond. And so I think the restroom trailer fits quite nicely there. I think it's a good use there. It basically is pretty non-invasive. If Ryan Kane, who actually runs the operation, has people at his door with pitchforks saying it's the worst thing ever and we need to do something about it, we certainly would be back. But I think it really is community dependent on what people want, which is sort of what I was talking about in regards to the parking area. We don't think there's anything wrong with the parking area. It's working right now. But if we're hearing from people, no, this is untenable, we're having a lot of accidents, it's a safety issue, certainly we would come back. We were trying to tick off sort of the major issues that we see to make, a substantial improvement, and then wait a few years and see if people have anything else that they'd like to see, or if they're happy with it.
Kate, can I add into that? The perception to us from the community, especially the White Pond members, was they didn't want to lose the quaintness of how the White Pond Associates had set it up. but still making it a public place. They didn't want necessarily all the bells and whistles to come out and be at the site. So that's been certainly something we've kept in mind as we're going through and developing things. But again, as Kate says, if the community changes that perspective, but I haven't seen that yet from the users. It seems they kind of like that quaintness of what it's traditionally been there. So that's our perspective from it and what we're seeing from the public there, Matt.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Kate.
And then I just had one other question. It
Yes,
was
Matt.
just, the topology, of course, is really challenging from a accessibility standpoint. I totally understand that. And then as a result, then, ways to deal with it that are accessible are, complex. But I guess the question is, would the technical ADA requirements be met by the parking area that's down by the beach and then the access from that to the beach? Is that technically all that would be required? And then the path is really more to support that universal access or universal design concept. It's not from a legal, ADA compliance perspective required. Is that the case or not?
So yes and no. We have to calculate it based on the capacity of parking. And so if you took all of the spots that are up at the top of the hill and then the ones that are existing on the bottom, we are not compliant. We need to have 3. We have been told that the ADA spots that are where the boat launch area is that are reserved for boating and fishing cannot count into that. And so what we would literally have to do is make 3 spots down at the bottom of the ramp that are ADA spots. The problem with that is that was actually one of the initial plans. And the problem was when we did the staff review, the chief of police and the fire chief and the assistant fire chief both said that right now it is extremely difficult without any parking down there for emergency vehicles, both to respond to anything that happens off season or any first aid or any type of swimming emergencies that happen during it. And so they said that they would request basically the equivalent of 2 spots so that an ambulance could pull in if and when it's needed. And that actually had to happen a couple of times. Luckily, no one was severely injured. And it was extremely difficult for them. They had to back all the way out. And if somebody were having an emergency, particularly a cardiac emergency, the ability for them to just do a 3-point turn and turn around is really important. So that's why we did 2 911 spots, 1 ADA spot, a bit of a pull-off, drop-off area, and then we're going to do 3 more spots up above. Did that help? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think I saw in the site plan there's kind of a set aside area. I don't know if that's the boat launch area or that's the 911 spots area, but that is kind of separate from the parking spots, right?
Yeah, so if you were to be headed down, in your own vehicle, the pull-off spot and then the 911 spots are on the left-hand side. And then going further down on the right-hand side are the spots that belong to the state side and the fishing and boat launch.
Okay. So those are state spots that I was looking
Correct.
at. Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Kate. So I would like to wrap up this particular presentation. I just wanted to make one maybe comment. We spent a little extra time on this application, and I think it was warranted because it's relatively complex and nuanced. And also, we didn't schedule a site visit on Saturday because I think all committee members we visited within the last 2 years. So we were all out there, and with COVID, we're trying to limit our general kind of exposure to the best of our ability. So I think this, more extensive kind of questions and answers was really, really very helpful. So Kate, thank you very much, and thank you to your team for all the great work. Okay, Heather, we ready to move on?
Yep.
Super. Okay, so our next application is the old rifle range. And now it looks like we are joined by Delia. And Delia, are you actually presenting the next 4?
I am.
Wow, well, we're looking forward to it. Well done. So maybe you could introduce yourself and old rifle range, please.
Great.
Thanks, Tom. Good evening, everybody. I'm Delia Kay, Natural Resources Director for the town. And first on the docket is the Old Rifle Range project. And I'm pleased to be joined by Bob White, who's the chair of the Trails Committee. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to just share my screen here to get started with this slideshow. So can everybody see my screen? Yes?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So this is a graphic of the Old Rifle Range. It is in this sort of greenish color here with the trails shown in blue and yellow and red. Old Mar Road is here. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is here. Kennedy's Pond, formerly Hayward Mill Pond, is shown here. This is the main trail, or the yellow trail, which is about 1.25 miles, sorry, 1.5 miles. And on, excuse me, on this graphic, you can see that there are these 3 targets. That harkens back to the history of the acquisition. It was acquired by the town in 1909 under a special town meeting. About 111 acres, and it was established as a rifle range in 1910, constructed for the Concord Volunteer Militia Company to train people heading off to the First World War. After that time frame, by the sort of the 50s, it had lapsed in use as a rifle range, but has always been continuously used as a popular recreational trail since then. You can see a little bit of the topography here. There's a ridge up here that's quite steep with these very, steep grades in here and down to Ministerial Swamp down here. So the project limits are at about the beginning of target number 1 up to about this point here where the Red Trail branches off the Old Rifle Range. So the project goals are to really improve the safety of this path. It's quite treacherous in the winter. In some locations, it is about 1 foot wide. In the winter, it becomes icy, slippery, and impassable. And certainly with COVID, this past spring, where we noticed an increased use in trail use in general, but in particular, this property here, it was very challenging for people to be able to pass safely if they were coming in 2 opposite directions. So you can see here, even if it's not treacherous in the winter, it's in some locations, it's so sloped that if it's wet at all, it becomes very slippery, and it's not the safest trail that we have out in our extensive trail network. And so we want to improve the safety. We also want to improve the accessibility as best as possible. We would like to make this ADA, it won't be ADA compliant because that will be next to impossible to accomplish here, but the Forest Service has guidelines for making trails more accessible than this one currently is, and that would be a project goal as well. Just going back to the prior graphic, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the 3rd goal, which is connectivity. We have the Thoreau School here, we've got Sanborn down here, and we have Katarina Heights, Harrington Ave, and these neighborhoods. And so there's a lot of potential for people to access this really incredible, 100+ acre property. And we'd like to see that there's a little bit more connectivity potential that we might be able to accomplish with this project. So what we're really looking to do under this phase is to conduct survey, permitting, and develop design plans that would allow us to have a 4 to 5 foot wide trail in these locations that are against these very steep slopes. The work would be from the standpoint of how the match breaks out. We would have in-house work for some of the engineering. The survey would be out, we would put that out to bid. We would put out specialty engineering, for example, soil sampling and developing trail cross sections and slope stabilization measures that we would look to put out to bid, getting expertise from a geotechnical and or structural engineer. The wetland delineation we would do in-house, and the existing conditions plan we'd have developed out of house, and then the design plans and cost estimates would be done in-house. And I'm going to just try and be very succinct. So I'll ask for any questions at this time.
Delia, thank you. And to reinforce your proposal, you led us on a tour on a cold and wet Saturday morning. Thank you for doing that. We didn't lose any committee members. That was good. I think our liaisons are Judy and Peter. Questions for Delia?
Yes, and I can attest to how I walk on that trail regularly. And last year when it was iced over, for some crazy reason, I thought I could cross that, and I was hanging on the trees. It was very treacherous. So it's I certainly can echo what Delia laid out. And just Delia, the project is to do up to the design work, but it's not the actual construction of the trail. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And would you anticipate that there might be requests back to the CPC for construction?
I would anticipate that. We did, the Trails Committee and I put in an application to the Mass Trails for design, which was not funded. I have an appointment actually to speak with the Mass Trails person later this month about that. But my sense is that it's, the trail improvement section that we're looking for is a 1/4 mile length of trail. Mm-hmm. And they're really sort of interested in looking at larger projects. We will put in an application for funding from Mass Trails, but I don't know the feasibility of obtaining state funding for that project. And if we weren't able to do that, then yes, we would be back in front of you requesting construction funding.
Okay, thank you. That was the only question I had, Tom.
Peter?
Yes, Delia, once again, I reiterate what Tom said about you're taking the time to show us the trail, as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. One question I had is, the scope is, as defined in the application, is quite narrow. I am not familiar with the trail in its entirety, but I was sort of follow on to, I guess, Judy's question. Might there be subsequent requests, throughout the trail for similar improvements, or in your mind, do you think this challenge of the slope and the narrowness of the trail, is it pretty much relegated to just this one section that we saw?
That is a great question, and let me just go back to one of the graphics. Oops, wrong way. Here that shows an overall. So there's also a very narrow section in here between targets 4 and 3. The difference here, I think, is that although it's quite narrow, the wetlands are almost at the same elevation, and it would be something, if we were to do improvements here, I think that those could be done much more easily in-house than we would have. You don't see it on the topo from here, but you can see it a little bit more from the photographs. The wetland down here it's quite, it's probably several feet down from the trail itself, and it becomes a lot more challenging and needing of engineered plans to kind of design this length of trail. So sorry for the long response, but in answer to the question, I don't anticipate that there would need to be an extension of the scope of the project to accommodate that additional sort of narrow area between targets 3 and 4.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Peter, other questions? Thank you, Delia. No, other members of the committee? Questions for Delia? John.
Delia, do the targets have any historical significance? Are they of any interest in your maintenance of the trail?
That's a great question, and I did reach out to Heather Gill when I was submitting the application for Mass Trails, and because they're over 50 years old, they do have some historical significance. They're concrete structures backed by a soil berm. And I'm sorry I didn't include a photograph in the presentation, but they have, 3 of the 4 of them have structures that are in front of them that were used to raise and lower the targets. They're quite interesting in and of themselves. And I think the design, any design that we would undertake would take that into account and ensure that those remain as part of the trail features.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delia.
Welcome.
Thanks, John. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, questions for Delia and Bob from the public? Yes, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, if you're upgrading the trail here into a pretty high level with the 4 to 5 foot wide, I mean, especially when compared to the rest of the trail, I wonder about the increased amount of access and the connection to the rail trail. And it seems like, you know, while the scope of this project is just limited to that one little stretch of trail, if you look holistically at this, that connectivity is probably, you know, an even bigger challenge, probably a bigger scope project. And yet it is something that kind of begs to be addressed, especially if we're upgrading this trail.
So from the standpoint of the connectivity to the Bruce Freeman, we actually would not want to have that connectivity occur at the old rifle range. And let me just go back to this graphic of the topography, the USGS map. So here's again, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is here. Our parking area is here. And Old Mill does this, and Williams Road comes in here. So we actually had a situation over the summer where there was, you know, a number of people that were parking at this parking area here in order to access the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And we got some calls and some complaints, and, you know, the police department has looked at it, and it's, even if you put in a crosswalk here, you cannot get a safe crossing here. I don't remember what the speed limit is here, but I think it's 35, maybe it's 30, but cars do travel quite quickly, and the police department didn't feel like this was a safe access. And so we actually, it was recommended by the police department, and we followed up on that recommendation to sign the parking area as no parking for the Bruce Freeman. So I think there are other opportunities for connectivity to the Bruce Freeman from some of our other conservation lands. But this, I would caution against it from the old rifle range itself.
But I guess it's just, you know, I don't know how we could expect anything different in that, you know, it's a natural connection point for someone making a loop from West Concord, you know, that you're going to be, as a pedestrian, I'm not saying as someone parking at that spot, you know, you're going to want to, I mean, I do it all the time, I have to say, go from the Bruce Freeman, connect through the old rifle range and loop back through Rideout Park, and I'm back home. I just don't know how we, you know, can improve this section of the trail and not expect to increase the amount of, you know, traffic and connection through to the Bruce Freeman. So I know it's a big challenge, but we've got to face it somehow. If we're going to do this project and it's going to draw more people, we got to figure out some way to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I'm not anticipating that it will necessarily draw more people to this particular conservation land, but, you know, I mean, it's certainly could have that unintended consequence. It is quite, you know, when I was out last week or the week before, just taking some photographs, I, you know, was out for maybe, you know, from in and back out for 20 minutes, and I passed 11 people. So
I think it's about the highest trafficked trail in Concord. I don't know, maybe, you know, some of the Minuteman National Park might have more, but it's very, very high traffic.
Yeah, and I
Thank you.
guess
Judy,
to
please.
build on Matt's point, and again, just maybe for future consideration, is that that trail does cut out having to walk along Harrington Avenue, which is very dangerous if you're coming in from down off of the Mill Road that goes into Muscataquid. And I think that's why I see a lot of, kids doing that. And I think part of it is because it is safer than walking on the roads.
Bob, is there
Okay,
anything you wanted to add to the presentation?
It's obvious to me from the work we do as volunteers to build trails and try to improve them, that you can see from the pictures that this is far beyond volunteer work, and it does need professional treatment, design, and certainly construction with heavy equipment of some sort to get in there to build this trail. So while I am always ready to jump in and build a trail when I can, this one would far exceed anything we could do on our own. So I think this is essential that we get the funding if we're going to get this project done. It is probably the trail in the worst condition of any in the trail system in any of the 14 conservation properties, and it's badly needed.
thank you, Bob. Thanks, Delia. Any other questions? Great presentation, very good discussion. Thanks, everyone. Heather, what do you say? Are we ready to move to Chamberlain Park Bridge? Very good. Delia.
Okay, moving right along. I apologize, I can't figure out my mouse. Okay, so Chamberlain Bridge. This is an aerial photograph of Chamberlain Park shown in this long linear parcel here. Here's Lowell Road. Here is the municipal Keyes Road parking lot here. Townhouse is over here. And our little bridge here is the Zigzag Bridge, or the Chamberlain Park Bridge. It goes from the Keyes Road parking lot and travels 170 feet into Chamberlain Park. Chamberlain Park was gifted to the town in 1969 from the Chamberlain and Newberry families to honor their mother, Anne B. Chamberlain. And that bridge was constructed in the early 70s and is 41 years old at this point and is nearing the end of its functional life. This is our first project goal is safety. This is the summer conservation crew and Jim McCone under here. This photograph was taken in 2015. So this is the observation deck here. And this is the section of the bridge that is constantly failing. In this photograph, they are shimming up this particular pier. When we did the site visit on this, and anybody who's walked it in the past several years knows that this corner here goes off at quite a steep pitch. So obviously it's time to replace this bridge. You can see the condition of the decking here. It's, the old pressure treated wood was I guess the arsenic really did make it last for quite a long time, but 41 years is sort of nearing its expected lifespan. A second goal is accessibility. You can see here in this graphic quite the pitch that comes down here. We did have, through CPA funding, bridge structural plans developed, and they were able to develop ADA compliant plans. So that's obviously a goal, that this bridge replacement would be ADA compliant, as well as the walkway that goes from Lowell Road to Chamberlain Bridge. This is again just another example of, we can swap out bits and pieces and we can sister beams, but that's really just a stopgap measure that we've been trying to do over the past number of years. And it's time for this to sort of get a full makeover. Third goal would be connectivity. And just going to, again, this graphic here. So again, Chamberlain Park is here. There are a number of people that park in this lot here and cross through the park in order to get to Monument Square. The only other option to do so, to get from this parking lot, is to come up to Main Street and cross this way. So, you know, it's a possibility to do that, but it's a little bit more inconvenient for a number of people as they're going to the Colonial Inn, or in some cases to, you know, the church here, as well as just the ability to walk through a really beautiful little green oasis in the center of town. So what our goal for this, in terms of what we're requesting in funding, is to obtain survey, permitting, and pathway design for this project. In terms of, I'll anticipate the question in terms of whether we would come back for funding. The bridge estimates looked at the overall project cost at $283,000. And that's only having to replace a few of the piers in that sinking section of the observation platform. But 85% of that was from demolition. And so part of this phase of the project would be to look at whether we could do that demo in-house. And then my goal would be to come back to CPC and request construction funding, but to also go to the trustees of town donations, which holds the gift that was initially set up when the land was gifted. They have, I will say that they have refused that in prior years, but I think it's worth asking the question again.
Thank you, Delia. Nice presentation. Our liaisons, I believe, are Judy and Paul. Judy?
Delia answered my question that I was going to ask about potential future funding to build the bridge. So I did not have any other questions.
Thank you, Judy. Paul?
Yeah, that was my question as well, but I only have one other. Is there anything specific you can speak to that that's required to make this bridge ADA compliant? I mean, I know right now it seems just really old and a little bit dangerous if you're, you know, have challenges with mobility. And is there anything specific that's already been identified that has to be done to it?
Well, really the only thing that needs to happen, it has to be a minimum 4-foot width, which it is, and it has to meet the appropriate grades, both longitudinally and crosswise. And given the condition that it's in now, it doesn't meet certainly the cross slope. I don't know about the longitudinal, and I don't know. I've tried to find out whether it was initially designed to be a less than 5% slope, which I'm sure it is. But it doesn't take a lot to get this bridge to be ADA compliant.
Okay, all right, thanks. I didn't have any other questions, Tom.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. Diane?
Pushing the space.
Diane,
usually pushing the space bar works. Thank you, Delia. A question about the approach of the Chamberlain Trust Fund. Do you have any idea why they have not been forthcoming? Is it a paucity of appropriate funding, or is it a philosophical issue? Could you help us understand that a little?
I'll try, Diane. I think it's probably a combination of both. I think the trustees of town donations is very, cautious about spending any money, and certainly doesn't want to spend down, an endowment, maybe more the interest. But looking back into the records, when the Chamberlain family donated the money with $22,000, it was gifted. So the town March 1970 town meeting said that the town accept as a gift sum of $22,000 for plans and construction of a path from Lowell Road to the town land on the westerly side of the Mill Brook. So to me, that says it goes, across to the town land. And I think what happened was it took a number of years for the town to construct the bridge, and it was upsetting to the Chamberlain and Newberry families who had expected it would happen a little bit more quickly. And so
What is the year, Delia, when that happened? I'm sorry,
what happened?
I mean, when that funding was offered and then when it was actually built?
So it was approved at the March 1970 town meeting. And then the bridge was not built until I believe it was 74.
Okay, originally constructed in 78, it says. It underway.
Okay, yeah,
Repaired
then
in 90.
my mistake.
No, it's not a mistake. I'm just trying to figure out, okay, thank you. So it was about an 8-year hiatus between when the money was given
And I think what happened was that the trustees of town donations at that time said, until you can demonstrate that you're going to actually do what you said you were going to do with the money that was gifted, which was to do that, then they weren't willing to give any additional funding to it. But it was revisited in 2003. And at that point, the then trustees of town donations said it's not appropriate because it's only for the path itself and not for the footbridge. But I think there's, the opportunity to ask that question again, because looking at the original intent of the town meeting action and the deed was specific to the land is conveyed to be forever used and maintained as a pedestrian path extending from Lowell Road to the Mill Brook. So at least, more of the bridge is on the Chamberlain side, but even if you just said it's a 50-50, then I think, it's up to the trustees of town donations to determine if that's acceptable. But I think it's worth asking that question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Other questions for Delia from the committee? And John?
Delia, do you plan to keep the current design, the zigzag?
Yes, and the main reason for that is because the majority of the pilings were driven to bedrock and are in good enough condition that they can have additional structural support sistered to those pilings to be functional. So the ones in the middle would have to be replaced. But the whole design of having that observation deck is, I think, a really nice feature. And that would be the intention, is to maintain what the existing design is.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Other questions from the committee for Delia? Seeing none, questions from the public? Matt?
Yeah, I guess a lingering concern that I have, not about this specific project, but just about the projects that I've been hearing about tonight is, do we get a completed thing out of the scope of the project? That we're doing design work, we're, speccing out things, but then in order to actually get the benefit to the public, we're going to have to do subsequent phases. And I guess that was the nature of my question about the White Pond and about the restroom facility. It sounds like maybe that's not an issue, but with the next two projects, it certainly is. We're paying for design funds. We'll end up with a nice picture. Maybe that'll be enough to inspire people to then throw in more money to get it done. But, we're at the outset, we don't know what the ultimate cost is going to be. And we're going to go another year and we're going to have a picture, but we're not going to have a project, something done. So I guess I would just be careful about the number of these kinds of initiatives that don't yield something themselves, but instead create a path to an eventual thing.
Thank you, Matt. Any other questions or comments on this application? Seeing none. Delia, thank you once again.
You're welcome.
Heather, are we ready to move to Emerson Conservation Restriction? Heather's given us the thumbs up. And Delia.
Okay. This project is the second and final phase for the Emerson acquisitions. I think, well, let me just first start by orientating everybody. So Haywood Meadow is here. This is Lexington Road here. Cambridge Turnpike is here. Walden Street here, and the police and fire station and Millbrook. And in yellow are the trails. This is the main trail through Haywood Meadow. This is a little woodland trail. They join up here and they traverse through to the town forest and ultimately 1.7 miles later to Walden Pond and Thoreau's cabin there. In red, outlined in red, we have the Emerson House, which is here. This is the parcel which they intend to retain. This is Lot B and Parcel B and Lot 5 that were acquired through CPA, town funds, and land trust funds last year. And this is the final phase of the project in which to acquire a conservation restriction on this Lot 1. I think it's important just to sort of give a little background of the Emerson family and the then formed Ralph Waldo Emerson Memorial Association, which is the nonprofit literary foundation that was founded in 1930. So the Emerson family and the association has been a longtime donor to public and private causes. In 1887, the Emerson family donated Emerson Field to the town. In 1910, they donated 40 acres of land to build Emerson Hospital. In 1922, the Emerson, Forbes, and Haywood families donated over 80 acres around Walden Pond to the state to preserve the woodland character and protect the pond from overuse. In 1930, the then newly formed association donated land for a new Concord museum, including a replica of Emerson's study, furnished with the actual contents of his study as of his death in 1882. In the 1950s, the association donated land for the Concord Police and Fire Station on Walden Street. And then in 2011, they gave us a revocable easement for the Emerson Thoreau Amble from this section down to this section here. And as I mentioned, in 2019, the town acquired these parcels of land from the association. So I just want to sort of mention that because they have had a long history of community and civic mindedness in the town. The Emerson House itself is open to the public 4 days a week. They have no year-round staff and only paid seasonal guides. So the goal of this project is really to bolster the endowment of the Emerson Association. Their main mission is to foster continuing interest in Emerson by keeping his house and its surroundings open to the public, enabling all to enjoy a better sense of the real man in the context of his home and his town. And what they're trying to do is not only maintain this endowment, which has been funded for the past nearly 100 years by members of the family and generous donors, but they have visitors that come from around the world, as many of you know. And at this point, it's about 3,000 people who visit this property. And they go to the they go to the Concord Museum and are often disappointed that they learn that the house is right across the street, but for much of the year, it's not open to the public. So not only are they looking to bolster an endowment to maintain this ability to have this transcendentalist treasure open to the public, but to increase that, their goal is that the museum, the house itself will be open on the same days and the same time frame as the museum itself. And the secondary goal is also to maintain this section of the amble here. There's a small section in the southwest corner of the lot that crosses through here. If we were not able to purchase the conservation restriction with the associated public access, it would be very challenging to relocate. So this is the amble in that particular section. This is at the tree line is Haywood Meadow. And this is where the boardwalk is now. And if we had to relocate off the corner of the parcel that it's currently on, it would be extremely challenging going through a cattail swamp. So what we're looking for is the ability to maintain that amble in its current location, to maintain that connectivity. And we would purchase a conservation restriction from the Emerson Association. The land was appraised in 2018 at $650,000. And we have negotiated a purchase price with the Emerson Association for $560,000 for the conservation restriction. So the CPA request would be $210,000, and it would be a project match through town funds of $355,600. And that is for the purchase price itself, development of the conservation restriction, installing 2 bounds to delineate the property line at this point here and this point here. I don't think it's necessary to do it between, this is town conservation land here, so just these 2 bounds here. And with that, any questions?
Thank you, Delia. For this project, we have 3 liaisons, Judy, Nancy, and Diane. Judy, questions for Delia?
Yes, to make sure I understand, so the town would not own the property. That would still be owned by the association. Is that correct?
So the fee simple would continue to be owned by the association. What the town would purchase is the development rights on the parcel. So there would be no ability to, it's a buildable lot.
Mm-hmm.
There would be no need or no ability to construct anything other than have the trail through that parcel.
Okay, and the only public access that would be permitted is the trail itself on the property?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, well, that's actually a good question, Judy. I mean, generally conservation restrictions are written to, you know, you can provide broad public access or you can provide access limited to the trail. Let me just go back to the presentation and just sort of show you. So this is the Emerson house again. These are the pines that Emerson planted that are referenced in the application. And this is the end of the house property. And this would be the sort of parcel itself that would be acquired. And this is the gun house that you may be able to see through the tree line here. Yeah. So there's actually a steep grade that comes off the sidewalk here. It's a 3-4 foot drop. I don't anticipate that there would be any desire for public access here, but that could be negotiated if we wanted to sort of have some additional public access. But to be honest, I mean, I don't see a whole lot of value except in this ability to maintain the trail and maybe reserve the right if that becomes too wet in 50 years that we have the ability to move it.
Okay, yeah, because it is kind of wet down there. And maybe this falls under open space. It strikes me another benefit of the conservation restriction is to maintain the historic landscape. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, that's a good point.
Okay.
The Emerson house itself is on the National Register.
Mm-hmm.
Haywood Meadow is a national landscape, historical landscape. So I think very important points and something that should be pointed out in the conservation restriction. So I'm going to make it.
Okay. Yeah. And I don't know if that has any impact on this application. I guess it wouldn't fall under historic preservation, would it, Nancy? Just something that we might want to make sure is preserved if possible.
Thank you, Judy. Nancy?
Okay.
I would just say, whoops, I lost my thought. I'm sorry, I'll come back to it.
We'll come right back. Diane?
I don't have any specific questions, Delia, except to just really understand one more time. We provide for the Emerson House and its operations. the amount of the aggregate amount of money. They then use that money to help to make the house available for common usage when the museum is open as well. So they're kind of companion operations. Is that right?
That's their goal. So what this application would do is they, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
For a curator or to pay for somebody who can be there all the time, or can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
I don't have any knowledge about how they would use the money. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the purpose of this would be to provide them, as it was with the purchase last year, we wouldn't give it with strings attached that said they had to have a curator or that they had to, be open 5 days a week by a certain time frame. It's just to allow them to continue to fund their operations. They are a nonprofit, literary foundation that the money would go into.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought that one of their goals was to be able to make it compatible with the museum.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
I'm just saying that we can't direct that they have to do that.
No commitment.
That's their goal. That is the stated goal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Nancy, coming back?
I remembered, yes. Judy mentioned expanding access or some flexibility for access. I think that's a really good idea. And there could be a lot of benefit to that. It might not be that difficult, right? And what was, in the Emerson's time, what was the condition of the landscape there?
I would imagine, in the,
Meadowy.
or mid 1850s, he died in the mid 1880s, I think, that it was generally open as most of Concord is.
Okay, thanks. That's what I would think.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Other members of the committee, questions for Delia? Hey,
I
John.
had one question about the easement itself, and then one follow-up question. Is the easement in perpetuity?
Yes.
Okay. And just in terms of the decision process, what was the appraised value of the land again?
The appraised value was $650,000 in 2018.
Right. So I'm just kind of curious. So the budget for this project is almost at the appraised value. Was there a discussion about a fee simple transaction, or was that just something that didn't come up?
There was discussion. The association preferred to keep the land itself, and really, you're right. I mean, we're paying in terms of purchase price. I think it's 86% of the fee simple. So it's not a huge, but it is. The purchase price that we negotiated was, I think it was $560,000. So, it's not the entire fee simple price. And there's some value to not having the ownership of the land. I mean, the maintenance of the land still is retained by the landowner. But we have the ability to have this undeveloped parcel that still is providing that public benefit of the Emerson Thoreau Amble connectivity.
Right. And was this a similar arrangement with, as I look at the map here, Lot B and Lot 5, or were these fee simple arrangements?
We purchased those in fee simple largely because they were almost entirely undevelopable. They're both almost entirely in the floodplain, and so the price was much lower.
Okay.
I don't recall I know that the Lot 1 is 0.68 acres, and that's appraised at 650, and Lot B and Lot 5 it was 200,000 and about 7 acres. So it's sort of to buy those in fee simple.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Great. We'll go to John and then Burton.
Delia, Judy mentioned, and I've seen as well, how wet it can be. Is any trail work planned with this money or with other monies?
So this money will not be used for any trail funding. And Bob is the powerhouse behind the trail work that you see that's been done out there. All those boardwalks are Bob. Primarily, I would say 90%, if not 100% of that. We've had some AMC efforts and some, volunteer efforts. Actually, AMC was a volunteer effort. That trail maintenance is built into our budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Burton.
Hi, Delia. Is that lot that we're talking about putting the conservation easement on, is it an existing lot today? I'm looking at the town GIS and it looks like it's a unified lot with a property that the house is on.
It's currently a unified lot. Okay. Part of what we would do is develop a meets and bounds plan and an approval not required plan. That would then become the CR plan.
So, I mean, I don't know. We haven't gotten out my measuring tape and figured out how many potential buildable lots there are that are in that remaining in the existing parcel today. But as there consideration, I mean, it is an expensive easement for conservation restriction. In consideration to putting a conservation restriction on the entire parcel as it exists today, so that the house is it's preserved in its present state across the entire parcel.
So it is one buildable lot. It's in zoning, it's zoned as residential A and B, but the A is up on where the frontage is. As it's drawn on that graphic, it has 150 linear feet of frontage, which is what a lot in residential A requires. We had asked the association if they would be interested in placing the remaining land under a restriction, and they're not interested in doing that. I mean, they have their own foundation where they will maintain that house in its current condition for the reasons that they wish to do. And to me, given the amount of giving that they've done to the community, it didn't seem to me. I mean, if they had not given all of those parcels of land, I think the town would be in a much different position in terms of its, community and public safety services. And the association wouldn't be in a position that they needed to be requesting this money from the town now. So that was my sort of thought about that, but I'm obviously, this is a decision for the CPC.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question because what I could imagine is them coming back and asking for a conservation restriction funding for the easternmost portion of the lot along the Cambridge Turnpike in another couple of years. And can you give us a sense of what a conservation restriction typically costs in terms of a percentage of value of the land? And then my last question, since it's related to that, is their property, does this have would granting of this conservation restriction easement to the town have a significant effect on the property taxes associated with the assessment associated with the parcel?
Okay, great. Those are excellent questions. So in regards to the eastern portions, they initially were working with LandVest, and LandVest had divvied up that lot. Do you want me to go? Is it helpful to go back to the graphic, the aerial?
I think it would be. I'm looking at the GIS, but I think yours is better.
So again, this is the lot that the Emersons will retain, and LandVest had sort of divvied up these parcels initially into, I think, like 3 lots that could have been sold off. But the association really did not want to sell them off. And what they have told us and what is presented in the application is that the CR acquisition here would be the second and final request for funding from the town for any land here. So I think it's a fair forward-thinking statement to say, well, what about in the future if they ask? And I think that can be, worked into an approval to make that be binding, that this is the final acquisition. Your second question was in terms of what is a fair cost.
What?
LandVest initially told the association that a CR was worth 96% of the fee simple. Really, really high. So I asked the land trust and they said, I said, do you work within a range? And they said, not really. And I asked John Avery, who appraised this parcel and is, longstanding appraiser. And he said, there's no industry standard for what you purchase, but it really depends. He said, if there's any usability of the parcel, then it would go down some percentage. But if, what we're getting is, total restriction on development, but the ability to have public access, that it seems 86% seemed a reasonable, high. I agree, it's high. But I think the benefit of what it's providing to allow the Emerson Association to continue to provide what is community benefit. This is not a private benefit. This is a community benefit to have Emerson's house open to the public. And that is their goal. That's what they look to do.
Thank you, Burton. Thank you, Delia. Burton, a follow-up?
Yeah, just a follow-up question, two. One of which is, will this reduce or otherwise affect the assessed value of the remaining of the property? And lastly, I guess, and this is the proposed lot in which we'd have the CR. Is it your view, just, and it doesn't need to be heavily researched, that is a buildable lot? I'm just looking at where the 100-year floodplain is and things like that there is actually a commercial, or not commercial value, but there is value as a developable lot there today. Is that your assessment?
It's definitely a buildable lot.
Okay.
And then so it's an interesting question on what the value is of a CR assessed parcel. And Lane Partridge would be able, who's the town assessor, would be able to give you a much more nuanced and knowledgeable response. But what, as I understand it, the value associated with the property values of adjacent lands does not change, because in fact, in some cases, it increases because you have the value of having conservation land right next to you. So the value of the parcel itself, that I don't know. It's obviously not taken off the books, but the taxes of lot one itself, I mean, I'm happy to look into that, Burton.
But it sounds like likely not a diminution from the present value, but removing the potential value of if there was a house built there and what the assessed value of that would be down the road.
I can get you an answer on that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Burton. Other questions from the committee for Delia? Seeing none. Questions from the public? No, I don't see any. All right, Delia, nice job fielding all of those questions. Well done. Heather, are we ready to move to Warner's Pond dredging? Heather says yes. Delia, do you have energy to do this one more time? Can you bring us home to the end here? Yes,
okay.
Delia is ready. Warner's Pond, let's go.
Okay, so right, saving the most complicated one for last. Okay, so still can't figure out my mouse. I'm sorry. Okay, so Warner's Pond dredging project. I think everybody has seen this project, and Matt, I'm going to respond a little bit to your question in my presentation in terms of things sort of coming back a number of times. I don't know if it's positive or negative in your eyes, but in any event, this is a graphic showing Warner's Pond down here, and in blue are the streams and rivers and water bodies, and in red is the outline of the 75 square mile watershed that feeds into Warner's Pond. So you can see, here's the town line here. The majority of the watershed is outside of Concord's borders, which makes it very challenging for us to really manage any improvements to the water quality. 6 towns in that watershed. So since the late 1890s, Warner's Pond has been one of the most significant natural resources and popular recreation areas. Its ecosystem has provided habitats for numerous species of aquatic plants and fish and animals, and this continues today. However, since at least the 1980s, the pond has undergone eutrophication, a process where water bodies receiving excessive nutrients experience increased plant growth, leading to a decrease in recreational use by canoeists, kayakers, and anglers, as well as decreased ecological value from the establishment of several non-native invasive plants. Exotic invasive aquatic plants dominate the pond, and open water sections of the pond are diminishing, leading to limited fisheries and wildlife habitat values. Sediments have increased so much that in some areas, the pond is impassable by kayakers and canoeists. In 2012, the watershed management plan that was developed, funded by CPC, identified dredging a portion of the pond as the most economically feasible way to improve ecological health and recreational values, because water flows through the pond in a 24-hour time frame that makes the use of herbicides ineffective. Drawdown was also looked at and determined to be infeasible, as was hydro raking and a number of other management approaches. We had a dredging feasibility study that was conducted in 2018 that included sediment sampling, assessing sediment depths, and developing conceptual plans. I'm going to just break off here for a second and just show you, this is a graphic of Warner's Pond with the bathymetry, which is the water depths. And so the dark blue is the deepest, and the lighter blue is where it's quite shallow. So this is where, Fort Pond Brook and Neshoba Brook come in from the west. They enter into the pond here. And as they enter the pond, they're going through, flowing merrily through a stream. In high flow storm events, the sediments that are carried by the stream reach the much slower waters of the pond, and they drop out. And that's why it's very shallow in this location, as well as a little bit down in this area here. The general flow of the stream, of this dammed stream, is in this direction here, going down, eventually hitting the dam itself, and on through Neshoba Brook and eventually into the Assabet River. So the feasibility study also looked at sediment sampling. The sediment depths were evaluated. They range right now from 1 to 3 feet. And what was evaluated as well was to look at, essentially, this is the boat launch access here, dredging in this area to improve the recreational, the paddler capabilities, as well as the ecological health. This is the Giroux parcel up here that the town acquired a few years ago that the Recreation Department is looking to redevelop into a community park. This was evaluated as a potential dredge area. I think since the White Pond acquisition, there's less interest, but I don't think it's disappeared, for creating a swimming area in this location. But these were the two areas that were evaluated and determined to be feasible, to the extent that if these sediments can be removed, that they will remain open and clear for several decades to come. So we had, as I said, the conceptual plans developed. We received our MEPA certificate last year for the dredging, and were awarded funding in last year's CPA cycle for permitting, which is going to be a year-long process. And this, as you know, CPA last town meeting approved CPC's recommendations at the most recent town meeting for $500,000 in dredging last year for construction costs. This request is for $250,000 for the upcoming town meeting. And the total project cost is $2.5 million, which includes improvements to the boat launch access itself. And the remainder of funding would come from the town's capital budget. So in this graphic here, I don't know how clearly you can see it, but in the foreground, you can see these are, some water lilies here, which are typical of shallower ponds. But you can see this, all of this is milfoil and fanwort, which is very close to the surface and invasive and very challenging to get through in a canoe or a kayak. And this is just looking out, this is where the majority of the improvements would take place. This is our current quite unimproved access. We went through this discussion last year, and last year's funding awarded the construction improvements to this. And with that, I will turn it over for any questions.
Thank you, Delia. Our liaisons are Peter and Burton. Peter.
Delia, thank you very much. Two questions. One has to do with the budget. As I'm looking at the budget here in the application, I think the total cost is about 2.2, but you're right, between last year and this year's funding, capital budget, CPC awards or application award, it's about $2.5 million. So is there, where's the gap there?
So the main reason for this is this was budgeted in 2018. And by the time we get to construction, which I anticipate would be in the summer of 2022, I'm concerned about increased construction costs. So this is just building in a little bit of a buffer so that you may recall 3 or 4 years ago, I came to you for funding for the White Pond restoration, and I was short, a few dozens of, several $1,000s and needed to come back and ask. And it was sort of because the construction estimates, being estimates, they were low, and several years had passed between the time I had initially requested and we were awarded the funding. So I just want to build in that buffer of having sufficient funds that I don't need to come back at this point a third time for construction funding. But obviously, funding, if it wasn't spent, would be returned to CPC.
Sure. No, okay. No, thank you. And the second and final question has to do with the invasive plant species. It seems like that's a real issue. I understand the dredging dimension of this project, but how would the actual invasives themselves be addressed?
So that's an excellent question. The invasives themselves through the dredging would be addressed by drying them out. In the pond itself, what I'm hopeful for is that we have the ability to we can't even get the summer crews in to get the water chestnut out at this point because it's so impassable. The MILF, so I guess I'll start with saying, when it's dredged, the goal is that it will be dredged to a depth that you're removing enough sediments that you're not creating that medium for the invasives to grow in that location. And you're creating enough depth so that the sunlight doesn't have the ability to penetrate down. So it's sort of a twofold. The sediments, that really mucky, dense sediment is taken out. So there's less of a medium for the invasives. Plus the dredging depth reduces the amount of sunlight that can reach the now much further down in the water column invasives. So that affects their ability to survive in those locations where they're dredged. Where they are not dredged, so in that sort of, western part of the pond, that is going to be an ongoing challenge. Unless you took out all the sediments and all the invasives, I don't think you would be able to get rid of all of them. And the problem with, the different management strategies is that, if you hydro rake and you break up the invasives, you've just created all these fragments now that then just go and find somewhere else to root, and they're all thriving.
Right.
The drawdown is very problematic from a standpoint of the pond health, and it's super challenging at Warner's because it flushes every 24 hours. The water that comes in is gone within 24 hours. So it's hard to, when you do a drawdown, you really have to draw it down to a point where you don't have any water in the ponds. They do it in Harvard at Berry Hill Pond, but it has a much lower flush rate. So sorry for the long answer, but in short, the invasives at Warner's are going to continue to be challenging to deal with. We'll just have larger areas that will have far less conducive conditions to invasive growth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Burton?
Thank you. Delia, I'm just want to make sure, I'm having a little trouble understanding the total budget and the funding. So we have previously funded the permitting work. Was that the 75,000?
Right.
Okay. And then the overall cost is estimated between 1.8 and 2.2. You're looking for 500,000 in this year's application, is that right?
250,000
I'm sorry, 250?
in this application.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then 500 will come from capital funding in the town's 2021 budget. So what brings us to, well, what does this enable at this stage, this level of funding, and what gets us up to the total funding that's required of 220,000? And then lastly, the Commonwealth Avenue improvements, is that part of the dredging project? Or is it necessarily associated with it because of the access that's required, or how does that work?
So the construction funding was in last year's CPC bucket. It's not required in order to access the pond to dredge. That's just how I split it out. It didn't have to be that way. In terms, you know, I mean, what we're doing at this point is banking this $250,000 so that when we're ready to go to construction in 2022, we'll be ready to do that. So, you know, I mean, this is the year that the permits will be obtained. You know, so the schedule is that it'll go out to bid this fall. It's anticipating it will take a year. So in December 2021, we'll have the permits and the construction season will begin in 2022. So this is the final phase in the construction funding request in order to be able to be ready to go in 2022.
Okay, and you know what I think I'm missing? So how much have we previously funded? That's the piece I'm forgetting.
Right. So you just approved 500,000 at the most recent town meeting.
Okay. All right. So this is an additional 250. So that's 750 from the CPC,
right.
And then 500 will come from the town. So that's 1.2.
So it's actually, so it's 500 that was approved in the capital of 2021, and then 2022 capital is we're going to be requesting 1,750,000.
Oh, okay. So okay. So that's really the dredging budget, and the 1.7 that's coming from the capital budget. That's not us including CPC, and that.
Correct. Right.
So this 250 is the last piece from CPC?
Yep.
Okay. Got it. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, it's.
No, thank you, Burton. Good shape, Burton?
Well, I guess the last question. So then it sounds like we fund this, but construction would, pending that capital funding from the town, construction would proceed, but it would be in 2022.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions, John.
Thank you. Other members of the committee? Questions for Delia? Diane, then Judy. Diane.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Delia. You say that there are 6 towns in this whole watershed environment, Delia. What kind of collaboration or what kind of cooperation do we have with those other towns? I presume you're in regular contact with them about various things. Like, for instance, if they have invasive species along their banks and in other places, then the seedlings from those can rush right back into, our area. Is there a consortium, a collaboration, a coalition of these towns all concerned about protecting the water, or is that a rather hopeless proposition, given your understanding of how such things go?
So you guys have excellent questions. There is a group called the Sudbury, Assabet, Concord. So the Suasco SISMA, and the SISMA is the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And we're, I think, up to 38 communities and nonprofits and state and federal organizations that all we do is look at invasives. I'm on the steering committee of that organization, and we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The town of Concord has been, was a founding member since 2009 or 11. Lincoln, Sudbury, the communities around us, as well as DCR is involved in it. And so we do look at how do we regionally, because as you are relating exactly, our invasives don't know town borders. So we're trying to work in a watershed perspective. We do that with both terrestrial and aquatic invasives. So there's, grants that we go after as a region. They get broken down into towns or organizations because that's just how our funding structures work. But we meet bi-monthly, and we're looking at how we can sort of tackle regional invasive species projects.
So it sounds like there's a structure in hand.
Yeah, so I would say it's not hopeless, but it needs to be targeted.
Yeah.
And water chestnut is one that, has been sort of one of our heaviest focus over the past number of years. So ORS is also involved in that, so we have mapping efforts, we have, concerted town, efforts that are collaborations between Fish and Wildlife, land trusts, different towns, where we try not to make our problem somebody else's problem downstream.
And congratulations on your recent award. And
oh, thank you. Thank you.
Lovely. So thank you very much. That helps.
Thank you, Diane. Judy.
Yeah, just a quick question, just to clarify. This project does not include any of the dredging that would be adjacent to Giroux Park for swimming. Is that
so this budget does include that?
It does?
It does. This does still contemplate that in the funding.
Okay, thank you.
West.
Thank you, Judy. Other members of the committee, questions? John. John, unmute, please.
Okay. The dredging results in removal, correct? And so where does it go?
So the question is, where did the sediments go?
Yes.
Yeah. So assuming that they are all clean, which is what our assumption is, we will have to do some additional sampling for the water quality certification because we got one high hit in the, I think, 40 samples that we did. If they're clean, they can be used by the prison to spread on their farm fields. It's all organic material. It's it would be great for that purpose. If we have a number of different options, we could, they've agreed to take the sediments to dry them out. So we're using a piece of the prison land for that purpose because it takes between 3 and 5 acres for this amount of sediment, which is 30,000+ cubic yards. We do want to use some of the sediments in the pond itself to create an additional wetland shelf around the backside of Scout Island. That would be, especially if we had any contaminated sediments, we would not want to remove them from the pond because the disposal costs are astronomical. And quite frankly, we don't want to be passing some of our problem onto somebody else. So there's a couple of different options. They could be used as organic farm amendments, or some of them are intended to be used within the pond for a wetland shelf.
And are they removed by truck through the neighborhoods?
So I can provide you with the trucking route that we have had developed, and it would be via truck. And we've looked at the possibility of putting it on a barge, and that's just not as feasible. But if it's helpful to the committee, I can share with you. I don't have it here, but I can. The dredging feasibility study includes a map showing the location of the trucking route.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Delia, I would assume you have had and will have good community input processes in place for the project
Yes. So,
around issues like transportation?
yes, I mean, the permitting is going to be extensive. We'll need a notice of intent, that's the NRC. We need a water quality certificate through DEP. We need a Army Corps permit. Probably the most public process would be through the notice of intent. But I think we'd also want to have just a public meeting that's outside of the permitting realm, so that there's the opportunity for public comments just outside of all the permitting issues.
Thank you. Any other committee questions? Judy?
Yeah, just a quick question on the permitting, thinking about the timing for our process. Would those meetings be taking place before the June 2021 town meeting?
Yeah, I mean, that's the expectation, is that, we're going to start permitting over the winter. So the first thing to do would be the notice of intent application. But are you asking that question because you think we should have all our funding secured before we go through a permit process, or?
No, I was just thinking in terms of our committee process, just for us to be aware of where there will be various opportunities for public discussion with regards to this project, as we go into a town meeting situation. So it was more just thinking about the timing of the project in our process.
Got it.
Other questions?
Oh, I've got
Questions?
one last
Yeah,
question.
Burton, please.
Celia, just out of curiosity, do you happen to have a ballpark estimate of how many cubic yards of material are being removed?
Yes, I do have a ballpark estimate. It's 36,000 total between the north and the south, I think. Let me just double check that.
Okay.
It's a lot of truck trips.
It is a lot of truck trips. It is. Let me confirm that. I'm embarrassed I don't have that number right in front of me, but I'll confirm. Oh, I do have that number. Yes, 35,000
Okay.
over about 7 acres.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Burton. Members of the public, maybe Matt, this is you. I don't know if we have anybody else.
I think it's probably me.
Yes, Matt, please.
I guess first thing, I've mentioned at a prior meeting, but I think it's pertinent to bring up again, which is for these kinds of town-funded projects where there's going to be a separate capital allocation from the town's budget, it sure would make a lot of sense to get an integrated view of, the costs over time, and where they're coming out of two different pockets, but it's the same pair of pants. And so, I think especially with these town projects, we just need more clarity on that.
So is that, I'm sorry, just in terms of the, are you looking for more clarity on the total funding of 2.5 and the breakdown of?
Yeah, and then
CPA.
I mean, it's not just this project, but there are others too, where there's been a separate. We have the town warrant article with capital projects, and then we have this bucket of money that's the CPC funds, and it has a different review process. But really, in the end, we're funding town capital projects, and they're just different means to the same end, and in some cases, this very same project. So I guess just getting a more integrated view.
I would say, Matt, when we see breakdowns that include the various sources, that's certainly helpful. And we're really seeing the kind of integrated sources to,
what is this costing and where did the money come from? And
yeah. I think our applicants are doing a better and better job to bring us the kind of integrated sources of funds. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and then
any other questions?
Well, I guess I keep thinking of the challenges of this project, and I mean, I don't know that the neighbors had even considered the 35,000 cubic yards of soil. And by the way, the NMI StarMet site needs soil, so that's an interesting possibility. But it's probably in the wrong time frame, unfortunately. but I keep thinking, wow, we're going to do this, and yet there'll still be big areas of the pond, most of the pond, in fact, that I think will be subject to the same sorts of limited navigation, invasives. I just wonder, what are we going to end up with? Is it going to be worth it? I guess I'm just still a little concerned about that, because the area of the dredging, of course, is just for practical purposes a limited area. And sometimes I get this crazy idea of like, well, the land underneath of the pond is all town land. We currently don't have any kind of circulation paths or anything, that if the dam was just opened, reverted to a natural wetland, we would have more town recreation land. And I think from an environmental perspective, would probably be better. I don't know. But it's sometimes I just think, wow, are we spending a lot of money, and will we be happy with the result versus the alternatives?
So Matt, I hear in there maybe a question I could frame for Delia. So Delia, from your perspective, is it worth it? I mean, what I mean by that,
that's kind of the bottom line.
Not to be cute, but I mean
yeah.
that it is a project that has a particular focus of the pond. Do you have a perspective on the return on investment there?
So I think it's an interesting question about removing the dam, to be honest, actually, because, and I honestly don't think that's feasible at this point, because it was just reconstructed 10, 15 years ago, a fairly big expense. But you are absolutely correct from an ecological standpoint. People all over the country are doing dam removals, and it's improved the ecological
species.
From the standpoint of, I've sort of informally asked some members of the community, and hard, fast, no way. People like to have they like to have their waterfront property. So even if you were to drain the pond and get rid of the dam, people would have they'd have a lot more land behind them, but there's something very precious to people about the pond itself. So in response to the question about whether I think it's worth it, I mean, it is a lot of money. I think it is a lot of money. I think the use of the pond, though, has gone from, 100 years ago, people ice skated, they fished, they swam, there were lessons that, I don't think it was probably like the ponds that I grew up in, where there were leeches around where you learned how to swim. I think that's probably what Warner was like, where you learned how to swim, not like White Pond or Walden. But it's a lot of money, but I think the pond as it is right now if it's left alone, it will eventually fill into being, it'll take another 100 years to fill in, but that's what dammed ponds do. They fill in. You can see it at Fairyland. You can see it at, they'll just get shallower and narrower over time. So I'm not sure it's really a question that I think it's a community response as to whether that's a worthwhile expenditure of the funds. I think it's valuable, or I wouldn't be pursuing it. Whether or not, $2.5 million over, they say, the consultants tell me it's going to last 100 years. I'm a little skeptical of that. I would say decades, but that's a lot of money.
And that portion of the pond, though, not the whole pond. That's the thing, I guess.
Well, that's true, but let me just go back. And I know it's the end of the evening and people are tired, but I do want to just go back to this. Oh, I closed it by mistake. This graphic here, just to show you. So, this doesn't need any attention because it's deep. And if you stand at the Giroux property and you look, to the west, you see this great wide open expanse, and that's fine. And it's really these areas that are in here that are just, so problematic, and they're getting to be problematic in these areas as well. So, it's a good question. And I don't think there's one person that can answer that.
Yeah, I think that's a good response, Delia. Diane, question?
I just wanted to say that, Matt, it is a lot of money, but when you think of what we were talking about spending on White Pond, which is, you know, another $1.5 million, you know, this is, you know, this is recovering a resource that is invaluable, I think, to West Concord. And when we were first looking at the procurement of Warner's Pond, now I'm not speaking about the CPC now, but when the town was considering the procurement of Warner's Pond, there was a great deal of discussion about the fact that in West Concord, there was not a water access area that was as easily accessible as there is in the you know, in Concord, the other side of Concord. And I think that I guess I'm sympathetic to this kind of expenditure, and ironically, a little bit less on how much it costs to beautify the White Pond, which it was originally, we thought it was going to be free. Look, we've got this gift. Well, it hasn't been a gift, has it? So, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I guess I think that it's kind of all in perspective and all in the light, is it not? Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Well, Delia,
Hey, Hester, I haven't.
bravo. Hester, yes,
I'm
please.
sorry, I haven't had much to say, but my ears perked.
Please.
Delia, first, thank you so much. You've been working much harder than the rest of us all evening. But when you spoke about, of course, people love their waterfront views, and of course they do. Who wouldn't want to have a waterfront view? But in terms of the whole town's contributing money, that's probably a handful of people. I just want to be sure I understood. Are those the people with whom you have spoken, people really, the neighbors, the abutters, whatever the right word is, to the pond?
Yeah.
They clearly are going to be much more invested in it than most other people.
Of
for better or
course.
worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay,
Thank you, Hester.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are ready to draw this phase of our agenda to a close. And Delia, well done. Thank you. You fielded every question we could think of, and did it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delia.
Gracefully. Yeah. So thanks, and thanks
My
also
pleasure.
for your time with the committee on Saturday.
Absolutely.
With our tours, that was very helpful.
It was great. Thank
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And so that is going to move us to our CPC business section of the meeting, which Heather, I think is going to be very brief.
Yeah, we don't really have much.
Yeah, we have our fund
Thanks,
distribution
everyone.
letters. Yeah, Delia, thank you so much. Great work. Fund distribution letters, our project updates, and signage, which we are deferring until we get our primary work done, which
Right.
we're in the middle of right now.
No,
And no minutes this evening.
no, I've not had a chance to draft the minutes.
Okay, very good. So with that, are there any final reflections from the committee?
Again, thank everybody so much. And I'm wondering, Heather, if maybe you sent it and I just missed it, but it would be helpful for me to have a list of all the things each of us signed up to be sort of primary investigators on.
I did send that out.
Okay, what's it titled? I'll look for it.
I sent it out in an email that included the agenda for tonight's meeting, the
That's not
site
that email.
visit.
I'll go back and look. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you,
If
Hester.
you can't find it, just send me an email and I'll send it to you again.
Okay, thank you.
Judy, question, then John.
Yeah, and I may have missed this too. Do we have any idea yet what our funding will be for distribution this year?
No, so I've asked Kerry for an estimated number and she said she was going to work on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good question. Thank you, Judy. John?
I heard you mention the fund distribution letters. Have they gone out or are we delaying them for
That's
this year?
just something that's always on the agenda. It's not always an agenda item. I was just told when I started here, leave that on the agenda and never take it off. We don't have fund distribution letters to go out at the moment. Those only go out like once a year. I don't know why they have to stay on the agenda.
But have this year's gone out?
So yes, so everyone that got funded at town meeting in September received a letter stating that they got funded. Here's your grant agreement that you need to sign, or here's your MOU. All those went out.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's see, were there, Another question or comment? Yeah, Diane.
I don't want to harp on something at all. And Matt, of course, you're right about whether we should just let this pond go its natural way. But I've been much influenced by the waterfall and it as a passage for particularly butterflies, birds, and other things. And the reading that I've done this summer, more by accident than on purpose for this kind of, for our work, suggests that contiguous ways in which we protect these kinds of resources for birds that know that it's going to be there, for butterflies that know that land is going to be there, it seems to me important. And so I don't know how to encourage Delia to say that when she talks about her projects, but it's influenced me from the reading that I've done. And so I guess it's what causes me a certain kind of passion, over stairwells leading down to a public access area. So.
Thank you, Diane.
Diane, on that point, just, the comment about the interest in the pond being from the property owners abutting the pond and their value. I would point out that the town is now probably the largest property owner on the pond, with this great piece of conservation land that's going to be developed, and I think is largely, the value of it is that it's overlooking a body of water. I mean, that's what it is a view shed there. And so I think that people across the town will have an interest in preserving the pond as it exists. So
I think so, Burton. I mean, that's my sensibility. And I know it's expensive, but this is the kind of expense that I think has long-term consequences.
Agreed.
Final reflections?
All I would say is that, I'm not out here trying to just throw a bomb into the process. I just felt like it has to be said that, there is this other approach. There also, I think, will be limitations to what the project will yield. And so, we just have to be realistic. That's all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
About this project for a couple of years, Matt, so we've had a chance to digest.
I realize at this point I'm talking after we're
I'm not
6 months pregnant.
This is not a disputation with you. It is just I just wanted to explain where my passion for this comes from. And it comes from a broader set of readings, and a sense of it's in ways that with which I was not necessarily familiar. So before this.
Yep. Thank you. Are we ready to wrap it up for this evening? Would someone like to frame a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Diane. Second. Yes. All in favor? Oh, we've got to go through the list. Tom is a yes. Peter?
Yes.
Judy?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Burton?
Yes.
Nancy?
Aye.
Esther?
Yes.
Diane?
Aye, just to be
John.
a friend.
Just to be historic.
And John?
Yes.
All right, we are unanimously adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Great work. Heather, are we back at this next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday. Yep.
Okay, everybody, do your homework. We're going to do it again next Tuesday.
And it's a longer agenda, so.
A longer agenda. Okay, well, getting ourselves in shape.
Thank you.
All right, good
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Matt, thanks for joining.